All right, are we live? Good. All right. Forge. Gang, I am still a hard man. So I wanted to talk about where the trajectory of the planet is actually going. The trajectory of humanity as a whole. So when the British Empire fell or declined, and after the Second World War, the British Empire dissolved, market forces, which had previously been directed to Great Britain, because Great Britain had been the center of high capital finance in the 1800s, that center shifted to New York and to Wall Street. New York was already a very big player even at the dawn of the 20th century, but by the time of the Second World War, those forces had become irreversible, and as the Pax Britannica fell apart and was utterly shattered in the face of the Second World War with Germany that the British had engaged upon, America, under the impulses of a massive military-industrial buildup, has it entered World War II to fight the Axis powers, and then later against the Warsaw Pact, built up, and the majority of the market and market finance capital shifted to North America and away from northern Atlantic, Northwest Europe. And it shifted thereafter to the eastern United States and eventually to Silicon Valley, to Hollywood. And so the Pax Americana is the cultural American imperialism and dialectic of the American synarchy. Until relatively recently, this was the predominant system in the world, especially after the collapse of communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the collapse of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union. In more recent years, other countries have risen with strong market forces to challenge this naval and market hegemony of the USA. And so what we are witnessing beginning in the 2010s with the formation of the BRICS, as well as alternative currencies and Saudi Arabia breaking away from the petrodollar, other countries beginning to leave and break away from the petrodollar, is the fall of this Pax Americana. Another force that has began to revise or has undergone revision is the post-World War II consensus. World War II began on September 1st, 1939, when Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland. World War II ended on September 7th or 9th, 1945, when the Empire of Japan surrendered to the Allied powers. It lasted for 6 years. Roughly 100 million people died in this conflict, and it defined an entire generation that fought in the ranks as soldiers in this war. It defined the rest of the 20th century, and every subsequent event that happened afterwards was directly affected by this war. This is now starting to finally come to a close. Not only is the Pax Americana steadfastly deteriorating rapidly, but so is the post-Second World War consensus of 1939 to 1945. In the 2020s, it is essentially shown that the remaining World War II GI generation is dying out. Very few veterans are still alive, and they are very old. They are in their 90s or over 100 years old, and within 20 years or so, they will all be gone. An entire generation that also grew up in the aftermath of World War II have also come well past into the age of retirement. And entire generations of young people under the age of 50 or the age of 40 were completely unaffected by and completely and unilaterally not brought up in the values or in the instilled values of World War II. Therefore, it is obvious that in the 2020s, nearly 100 years after the end of the Second World War, and the generational impulse and the moral imperative into which it generated and made the world that came after it is steadfastly fading away into the dustbin of history. Just as the Victorian world of the 19th century or the Georgian world of the 18th century has virtually no impact or any kind of cultural entailment on the moral imperative of the 21st century and of the younger generation, so too increasingly does the 20th century and the great conflicts of the world wars are beginning to subside. And along with them, this post-war narrative is beginning to break down. Instead, new narratives and new spins and kind of new heroisms are being generated out of a more recent history. And so the narrative of this moral consensus is fading away. And along with it, the moral consensus of the atomic bombings and how they allegedly prevented further aggression and further warfare, as well as the notions of the Holocaust, the notions of genocide and fascism and National Socialism and various other things, and even of communism, is beginning to fade away. Instead, what we are seeing is a calmer, more stable, but less certain, less epic and less hero-driven, and a much less uncertain and more decentralized and more market-oriented and private capital-generated world consensus that is emerging, instead of the mixed economy and the mixed and strong high industrial dynamism of the previous age, the previous 20th century. We are seeing more decentralization, more multipolarity, and less government outreach into the market, and more private incentive and more capital incentive, as opposed to the sort of socialist and capitalist mixed economy of the past. Another aspect that is also falling apart is globalism. Globalism is a notion that arose in the 1990s and the early 2000s, that every country and all countries would eventually join together into common market blocks, and everyone would be able to participate. The wealth gap would close between the rich and the poor. Money would trickle down to everyone, even in third world countries. This notion is also likewise beginning to end and fall apart, and such notions and delusions with globalism are also beginning to fade away. Neoconservatism is also a dying fad and is gradually being replaced with paleoconservatism likewise. And the previous egalitarian notions in regards to a lot of social features are also beginning to erode and subside away. Instead, people are more interested in wealth, protection and acquisition of wealth and personal property, Stabilization of the market, stabilization of currency, diversification of currency exchange flows. People are more concerned with this and with getting rich, as opposed to social equality and egalitarian principles and the idea of ending racism, ending sexism, and these other things which are passing fads, and along with it, the notions of wokeness. These things are subsiding and are ending, and the public sector is gradually being replaced with the private sector. Instead, what we are seeing is the formation of the synarchy, the formation of a synarchistic system that wishes to advance technological innovation, technocratic control over things, and the replacement of democratically elected governments and democratically elected systems with technocratic authoritarian measures and authoritarian and protective incentives. Trade tariffs, trade barriers increasing, trade incentives and tariffs replacing open market currency, and diversification of currency and transfer exchange rates, and more of a rising incentive and interest in the increase of wealth as opposed to social justice, social egalitarian measures, and social issues, which are being replaced instead with the interest of becoming rich. What we are seeing is the erosion of what effectively is the last of old Western institutions. Western institutions that have existed since the Renaissance are falling and ebbing apart. Woke and social justice incentives have destroyed and have directly resulted in the complete erodation of Western institutions and their incentives and lack of interest in making said incentives, and therefore they are gradually eroding and falling apart. And as public institutions fade, new private institutions rise, guided by technocrats, multi-billionaires, globalists, and other outreach and outflow. The world is becoming increasingly gentrified. Instead of public organizations, public work shifts, we now have private businesses managed by multi-billionaires that control and run through corporations and increasing corporate control. The resulting synarchy is increasingly taking over, and corporations are wealthier than entire countries' GDP. The corporations will be the ones that will have more power. The privately owned billionaires will have effectively more power than actual governments will. Their incentives is to integrate humans with machine. The integration, the codification, and the complexification of machine integration into the human brain, into the human organism, to create a superorganism that is effectively post-human. This otherwise could be known and considered as transhumanism. The ultimate end goal as we approach the year 2030, and especially 2040, is the movement that is known as transhumanism. The idea of integrating robotic circuitry into human bodies, the idea of implementing and planting chips into human brains, and the implementation of using the brain directly to interact with circuitry. Therefore, this makes cell phones obsolete. Smartphones and other sort of cell phones become obsolete. Most computers and other types of keyboards and other integration circuitry become obsolete, as people can directly with their brain stem can interact with and engage in robotic and digital circuitry. People can access the internet via VR and through direct Neuralink. This is otherwise known as transhumanism, in which man becomes increasingly machine and machine becomes increasingly human. AI, otherwise known as artificial intelligence, is the incentive of making machines think and act and feel more like humans, and AI will continue to advance, and in the not too distant future will actually become even more complex than the most complex of human biological functions. Ultimately, the two, the human brain and AI, will become integrated and become effectively one. This brings us to what is known as Post Humanism, effectively a biotechnological process in which the very state of man evolves to such an extent that he and she or it are no longer human. There is no longer a specific gender as such. There is no longer a specific type of human as such. Ultimately, it is a trend of post-humanism. The technocratic system that is gradually replacing international borders and the international order will ultimately design and create and build exchange currency that is solely based upon credit, and upon those that accept such or said integration. By the year 2060, we would have reached a certain state that is known as post-humanism. Elon Musk wants to place human colonies on Mars and Europa and Titan, Jupiter's moons, respectively. And humans might actually become a multi-planetary species, but this is yet to be done. For the most part, the idea of permanent human colonies on the Moon, Jupiter, Jupiter's Titan and Europa, and Mars and Venus is perhaps still a little bit ahead of our time. Instead, one might see bases of mining and mineral extraction being utilized and built and extended throughout at least the inner solar system. But I do not see interplanetary and interstellar colonization happening in the near future. The 21st century will be a very interesting time. It will be a time in which the synarchy finally comes of age and fully develops, a return of multipolarity, the potentiality of a thermonuclear AI-driven Third World War between the United States and the People's Republic of China and other BRICS nations, the possibility of a prolonged trade war between different continental blocs, and the further integration of humans with artificial intelligence and the eventual symbiosis between the two, as well as advancements in human cloning. Because of the dominance of female mate selection, and there is a good video on YouTube called How the Roman Empire Fell Because of the Predominance of Female Mate Selection, which will show how the human birth rate will collapse. The human birth rate across the world is going to fall apart midway through the century, and the number of people are going to be dying more than humans that are being born. There is going to be a tremendous refolding and increasing radicalization and ideological shift that will take place as the post-World War II, the post-Second World War II, the post-Second World War, and the post-Pax Americana consensus finally falls apart and is gradually replaced as BRICS countries play an increasing role in the spending and monetary acquisition in the global economy. We are going to be reaching the technocratic eschaton in no time. So, Third Ford II says, the Forge World Order. Code of Cletus says, Forge. Third Ford II says, the latest battlefield is the war on woke. Ghost of Cletus says, we have only explored 10% of the oceans. We should finish here first before worrying about space. Well, I think people are more interested in what is in outer space than what's at the bottom of the world's oceans, Ghost of Cletus. Anyways, yeah, I guess that's it. We are going to be reaching the age of transhumanism within just a few years. And I'm afraid that they are trying to build technology that will directly change people's genders. Like people and even kids will at will be able to change their gender to whatever they want. And there is going to be further technological innovation to the symbiosis with AI integration. You know, the ultimate rise and achievement of the synarchy is taking place. We are going to be reaching the singularity. The ultimate end game is the singularity and reaching the technocratic human AI integrative singularity. Anyways, that's about it. Peace.